Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We all have a sense of pride in everything that we do. Sometimes more pride than not in certain tasks we perform or the way we present ourselves. What exactly is pride? How does that connect to our ego? We're going to peel the layers back today with somebody who's a transformation coach for men. We learn a lot every time we get together with Joshua Long. He's our professional of the year. He's back with us. Welcome. How's it going?
Hey, how are you guys doing?
I'm doing great. And this, we say this word, it means a lot of different things. And if you ask me, define pride, I have to think for a moment what I guess I don't know, a sense of ownership, a sense of putting your all into something, but I'm not even sure if that's the best way to describe it. What is pride?
Yeah, I mean, me being a Leo, Steve, like I'm all, very prideful, the lion on, standing at
Ah,
top.
okay.
I have pride has been one that I've discovered because I used to use pride as a very positive thing. And I'm still in the gray area with pride, I will say. But pride to me, the one definition that I give, I mean, to reflect back on all that we've talked about, false self and the ego and stepping into authenticity and purpose, being of service to others. To
Sure.
me, the simple definition that I always say to people, that pride is the protector of the ego.
Ooh, I'm going to need to process that. How
Yeah.
that it is the protector of the ego.
Mm-hmm. And
Wow.
I like to break down, like, we all have pride statements. And so if we just we'll use something, let's just kind of say like people that drink, drinking is a very, socially acceptable, behavior in our society.
Yep.
And you know that feeling when you like go out and you drink, and it's like, oh, you wake up the next day and you're like, I'm never doing that again, you know? So each time the weekend comes back around or a festival comes back around, we will say like, or if you're going out and have to work the next day, oh, I'll go out, but I'm only going to have one, you know? It's like that's the pride statement. So that's the ego kind of giving you the excuse and the permission to keep showing up in that stuck pattern. So I'm going to go out tonight, but I'm only going to have one drink. So that's the excuse that you're allowing yourself to still drink. And then you end up drinking five, and then you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, I wish I didn't do that. I shouldn't have did that. It's because you abandoned yourself and the ego won with that pride statement.
Let's redefine ego. We did last
Okay.
time we got together, but I think if we're going to connect these two together, knowing better, clearer what
Okay,
the
sure.
ego is, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So the ego is literally our protective patterns, our false identity that steps up in behaviors that kind of doesn't allow us to reach our authentic self. So ego can be, like we've mentioned in the past, we all think it's this arrogant, cocky, selfish, kind of imbalanced masculine energy. But in all reality, the ego is kind of even the kind things, it's the people pleasing, it's the codependency, it's the procrastination, it's the perfectionism, it's the rage, the anger. It kind of encompasses all of those. So if there's any behavior that's showing up to kind of keep you safe or to avoid feeling any negative feelings, those behaviors are the ego.
That's what I remember it being, protection.
Protection. Yeah, that's it.
Okay,
Mhm.
got it. So when it's trying to protect you, how does the pride come into play?
So, and I've been thinking of like how can I break this down in a simple form for people to really grasp this since our last week. And I kind of wanted to kind of take, you said you were a father, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so you have a little girl, or we'll say a little girl. Little girl?
I have a
Okay.
daughter who's 16.
16. So let's say she was like when she was like 7 years old on the playground. Okay, she's going to represent authentic her. Okay. And then we have you. So at 7 years old, there's this little boy that just comes up and you just see him come on the playground and like push her over and like just really hurting her, treating her really bad. So you would be the representation of the ego. So you come in to protect her. So that event would happen. So a week later, or even 3 years later, that's or a little boy that looks like him, or you remember him, or you think it is him. You see him coming back up to her on the playground. What would your instinct would be? That's the same little boy. Let me go stop it. So that you would represent the ego. Your daughter would represent who you're keeping safe. And even though it's 3 years later, you're reacting like it was the first time it happened to protect her. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
But in all reality, that little boy could have changed. It may not even be that same little boy, but you're already drawing in that conclusion to go stop it.
You don't even know what's going to happen.
You don't even know what's going to happen.
Right.
So so you would be the representation of that ego keeping you inner child safe.
Now, how does pride come into play in that scenario?
Pride comes in because you're reacting. You're taking pride in knowing what's best to keep your daughter safe.
Ah, okay.
And the excuse is she's going to get hurt. You know, that little boy did it to her before. I'm keeping her safe. So the pride isn't allowing the presence to actually occur. That little boy could be coming up to her to say, I remember 3 years ago when I pushed you over, and I'm really sorry for doing that to you. That may not even be the same little boy, and that little boy may be coming over to say, hey, do you want to play with me? But because you're standing as the father, thinking you know what's best for her,
Ego.
pride isn't even allowing the good or what could possibly be to even happen or occur.
Because it's the ego.
Pride is stopping that because dad knows best. Ego knows best.
Right, right.
Same concept.
Got it. Interesting. Wow. And this happens to us all the time, you're saying?
All the time. All the time. That's why I always say, like, once you get through because pride is the very first. That's why I say it's the protector of the ego. But what would you guess that pride is? Like, if you were going back to you being dad, like, I know what's best for my daughter with this little boy because it's happened in the past. What are you protecting from? It's usually shame and guilt that lies under pride. And that's humility. We all say, you got to humiliate yourself to heal. There's growth in humility. So really that would be dad swallowing his pride and humiliating himself to saying, I was wrong.
Mm.
The ego don't want to admit that. So it's pride. He's standing in that pride. Like, you're not getting through pride. I mean, you can obviously, but that's the hardest thing to get through because then you got to stand in an embarrassment or in humility when you're wrong, when you actually find out that you were wrong this whole time.
And somebody told me when I was at a low point, left a job after many years, and it was all good, my decision to leave. But then I'm like, oh my God, what do I do now? And he said to me, when you're at your lowest point, that's when you're most humble.
Oh, yeah.
That's when you're most open to receive and get everything and kind of figure it out. How do we squash the ego or keep it in check or just keep a leash on it?
Yeah, I mean, it takes complete willingness. I mean, and it takes you walking into self-honesty is what I always tell people. Like, you got to be honest with self. I mean, just this past weekend, I kind of, people know that I'm a life coach. And so when I'm with friends, they try to pull the life coach out of me, but then when I deliver the information, their ego comes right on. You ask for me to deliver. I'm here to deliver. But then you're standing so far in your pride that you have it all figured out, you know. And I'm there and I'm compassionate because everyone's on their own journey, you know. I can't People receive information when they're ready to receive it. And usually, like you said, it is in very low moments when you humble yourself, or in my situation where the relationship, I just ran out of possibilities to try to protect myself. Then you got to face it at the bottom of the pit. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
their pride came right up, and it's like, okay, well, you guys want the information, but then you're like, they're just not ready to receive it. Or you planted seeds, and they may lay down later that night and get honest with themselves and be like, he
Mm.
was right, but I didn't want to feel the humility or
I
the shame.
guarantee that's what happened. When
Yeah.
they had a quiet moment, then they process and like, oh, that was me. Well, I'm not going to admit it. I'm not going to tell. I'm not going to
Not
tell
in front of
Josh.
everybody. No.
Not gonna, Josh is never going to know about this. I'll never tell him. But isn't the ego send you on a bad course? Like let's say you engage in lots of physical relationships just
Okay.
because you're feeding your ego. You just want to feel a certain way. So you bounce from this person to that person, 3 in a weekend, whatever, hypothetical here.
Hmm.
It's feeding your ego because I believe our egos need to be fed to some degree. Some of us, throw a bowl in front of the ego and here, eat. And the others, oh, here's a spoon. I'm going to be very careful with that. Um, but it can do you an injustice. And sometimes I'm sure you don't even know it's going on.
Oh yeah, it's subconscious. You're not aware. It's all subconscious patterns. And that's where you end up, you know your truth and you know the life you desire, but that's when you're really letting the ego run your life, that's when we feel stuck. And it is, like you said,
Yes.
it's filling you up, but it's also empty. You know, that's the whole like living outside of ourselves. So whether it's a relationship, it can be food, it can be drugs, it can be alcohol, it can be work, it can be money, it could be literally your children, it can be your spouse. It's like when you're expecting and doing things to fill you up outside, that's why it's always empty. That's why you never really get full. It's a temporary feel good, but that temporary feel good is like what you said, feeding
Yeah.
that.
It goes away fast.
Right.
Goes away fast. And every time you think it's going to last a little bit longer, just in terms of, yeah, I feel good about myself, whatever it might be. How do we keep it in check? How do we, I know it's there to protect us. And I don't want to beat on the ego. There's
Yeah.
some good to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, even in coaching, we thank the ego. Like when we're going in to do guided inner child work and we meet that protector or that block, and that, we do a visual block, with a wall that shows up. What's the wall look like? Ask it, what's its purpose? And then when he states his purpose, you as the adult that's coming forward to meet that ego so that you can get on the other side to connect to the inner child, you're walking up and you're having a conversation with the ego and say, I got this. Like, I'm an adult now. Thank you for keeping, younger me safe. I really appreciate all that you've done. So it's not like we're bashing the ego. The ego needs validated and needs to know, like, oh, I did do what I did needed to do, and I can relax. Like, let that protector relax.
So when those situations come up, and now that we have identified, oh, it's the ego
Hmm.
popping in, insert name of situation, any of the ones you described, we talked about. Now that we know what it is, and we know what we really want in life, and it's not this over here that the ego is saying, "Hey, yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
just another time, one more time, just yeah, good." How do you reel it back in and just squash it down a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, like you keep asking, how do we really keep it in check? It really goes back to really accepting that you are operating in your false self and that who you're showing up as isn't really you. You have to accept that. If you don't accept that you're even living in a false self, you're not going to be able to kind of decipher what the ego is or what isn't if you're not even accepting that you are being false.
Hmm.
But that's
That hurt. That's painful.
does hurt. And then,
It does.
that's like
Yeah.
with my friends this week, and I'm like, as I see and I'm witnessing them, my heart is just breaking full of like compassion because it's one of those things I would just love to just shake people and be able to say, like, you see that you're in your false self, like you're not, but they're just now it's combative. That's triggered something in them, and that ego is just showing up in pride and like, oh, but I gotta do this. Oh, I gotta provide for my kids. Oh, I gotta do this. Oh, I gotta do that. And it's like, but who told you that? You know? Who told you, you're stressed out with your job, financially stressed, your wife's stressed, you're in this house, but now you're building a bigger house that's going to bring more financial, so where are you real not seeing that you're not living authentic? Your kids don't want the big house. Your kids want dad. Your kids want to play baseball in the backyard. Your kids want a hug and they want love. They don't want to come home and dad's like drinking every night. It's not what they want.
Or tired as hell because he's working nonstop
Right.
to build this big house. But let's look at that microscope. Why is he doing it? Is he doing it partly for his family, but also to feed his ego?
It
Because
is.
now he can say,
Mhm.
to his friends, "Hey man, look at my house. You guys want to come over?" It's like, I've hit the big time. Meanwhile, he's working his ass off, and he's miserable. But if his ego
Mhm.
took over,
Yeah. And what it really came down to, I asked deeper questions. What it really came down to is his dad was first generation immigrant and worked so hard and sacrificed his life and all this. And he accepted, I'll never be my dad, but I'm trying to be enough for dad. That's the deep wounding. So instead of accepting, let dad be dad, dad did what he did, release the pressure from yourself, show up as yourself, because now you're the person like you wanted as a father, and now you're hurt from him. Now you're doing the same thing to your kids because you're living with a wound that you're not good enough for dad. So you're trying to make all this money and build this big house because you want to be as good enough for your father.
and it
That's
can show up in so many different ways. Even in that example, it could be, let's say, the dad. He's building this big house. He's working, overtime to make it happen. He wants people to look at him in a certain way to say, wow, dude's made it.
hmm
He may have come from very humble beginnings, didn't have a lot of money, or um, he could have been, parents got divorced and it didn't, he just didn't feel like he was a somebody. Now he's a somebody because he was able to score this big house. We don't know the other story in that
Yeah.
it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it in the end.
And that's why I always say, I don't want people to get to the end of life or to the point of where they have regret, because the regret's one of the worst things I think you can exist in, especially at the end of life. Um, it's like
Yeah.
what would 90-year-old, if we just stop and ask ourselves, fast forward to 90 years old, what do you wish life looked like? And when even that's a journal prompt in itself. Write down what you wish your whole life looked like and read it. And then tomorrow start living that life.
We're doing that. And I think I shared with you in a men's group, and it's called a CPR, context, purpose, results. And you're
hmm
supposed to do a CPR for anything you want to do, whether it's having a podcast. It could be as simple as that. Why are you doing it? How are you doing it? What will the results be? The assignment was recently, and it's going to take a while to do this. Do a CPR in your life. Just what you said, what you want it to look like when you're around 90.
hmm
OMG. Like the thing is going to be pages long, and that's why it takes a long time. But it's a wake up call because it's almost like the blueprint of how you want it to go, but also where you came from. And anybody can say the word regret, and it's like, yeah, you don't want to have regrets. When you think about it deep, ouch.
hmm
Think now. Think now.
Right.
Tomorrow's not going to come here.
Exactly.
You have regret?
hmm
We all
Yeah,
do.
we all do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's sucky when you think
Yeah.
about it, how strong the regrets could be. And then like, time to change, time to make that change. Um, it's tough to say no to the ego.
Oh, it's very tough. Yeah. It's not
So
easy.
you're saying you really need to, with help from somebody like you, or just find it, connect it to why the ego is acting the way it is, because it is acting typically from your childhood.
Yeah. Just get curious. That's all I say. Ask
Wow.
yourself, why might I be doing this? And just really know that there's no shame in it. Even if you don't like what you find, there's no shame in it because it's just a subconscious pattern that has, like you said, has formulated from your life's experiences. It's nobody's fault, but it is your responsibility as adults today to really show up, one, the best we can for ourselves, but two, for others so we can live in that universal purpose of being of service to others. And being of service is just to exist and offer a loving energy. Love is healing. So if you can show up in love energy, you're already fulfilling purpose.
Do you feel that we're on autopilot, many of us, in
Mhm.
terms of, I forget how you phrased it before, but well, we're not authentic. We're not being, so many people say, hey, man, keep it real. Nobody's being real,
Nobody's being real.
right?
That's why I always think it's funny where, especially in romantic relationships, it's always like, I want someone to just love me for me. It's like, how can someone love you for you if you don't even have the strength to be honest with them on who you are? They
Right.
can't love you for you because you've never even actually, one, you may not even know who you are. And two, like, you've never told them. So, and it's
Hmm.
that's that deep soul that wants recognized, and that's connection. We all
Right.
want connection. But we're afraid to even show up as our authentic selves out of fear of being judged, not good enough, all of those things.
Or facing the reality. We don't want to face it. We don't want to, I go back to the dad. I just want the big house. I've been working hard. I deserve it. We're like, why do you really need that?
Right.
Let's be real. Not to use a cliche. Let's be real. Why do you want that big house? What's the reasons? Let's go. Let's hear them right now. Well, I want a big yard for my kids. Your kids are fine. Just what you said. Your kids are fine with the quarter acre. Don't worry about it. It's okay.
Right.
Next, why do you want that big house? Well, because I want to throw big parties. It's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. You could still have that, in your smaller house now. We could hammer through all of that. And then once we did or do, it would come back to what you're saying. There's
Hmm.
like that the example of his dad and
Right.
how he didn't want to be like him and all of that. Um,
You want to be good enough for dad.
yeah.
But
Wow.
then even, underneath that, and that is feeding the ego. Because if I don't get the big house and I don't make this kind of much money, then I have to feel failure.
Right.
But that's where you got to accept there's no failure to feel. It's a belief that you created from your experience as a child and what you witnessed your dad as. But, maybe dad told you to go out there, you got to work hard, you got to do this, and that's fine. It's awesome. But it doesn't mean that it's true
Right.
because that's his belief system. Now he's passing it on to you, and it's
Yeah.
okay. Everybody's belief system, everyone has a different life experience. But truth be told, you're not a failure if you don't have a big house.
Exactly.
But your
You
ego is
The ego
protecting.
thinks otherwise, but
Yeah.
it's you really need to peel layers back, many of them, to figure it out. And we can. That's why we call you,
Yeah.
seriously. And you really do have a way, and I said this last time, of making it clear where you and I could debate right now. I'm gonna lose. You're right. Because you're gonna hammer back to my childhood, and then it's gonna get to a point where I'm gonna be up against the wall. I'm like, Josh, stop. You're right. You are right. All right. I admit it. I can't deny it. There's
I
no,
let
it's
go. I surrender.
yeah, I surrender. Exactly. How do we find you? How do we connect?
Yeah, you guys can find me on all social media platforms at Coach Joshua Long. You can email me at transformation@joshualongcoaching.com, or you can just go to my website and kind of look at it there, sign up for the email list at www.joshualong.coaching.com, JOSHUALONG coaching.com.
Awesome talking with you. Your friends are lucky to have you, whether they want to admit it or not.
Right.
And
Thank you.
yeah, looking forward next time we get together. Good talk.
Have a good one.
You too. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.